We all learned the monetary theory of inflation, right? Too much money chasing too few good. Where is it, right? Here's my favorite graph. You ready for this? Ooh. Let me explain this one to you. Only the Japanese would be so bold. This was smuggled out of the Japanese cabinet office. And basically, does anybody watch Game of Thrones? Yes? Right. If you watch Game of Thrones, this all makes sense. This is nominal interest rates for the world since 1350. So here's the question. How many of you would buy Lannister debt? Right. You'd want a really high return because you could end up dead, right? You're going to hold that to maturity, and if they don't like you, that maturity could be short. But then what happens when you get John Smith bonds and a few other, John Snow bonds and a few other things? You add them together. Well, the capital pool gets bigger. Then you get a secondary market. The interest rate starts to go down. What happens is that by 1800, the Brits are able to finance the entire Napoleonic campaign with a perpetual of 3%. As the economy grows, the value of the bond shrinks. They're paying it off today. Nobody even notices. It's a rounding error. By the time you get to the eve of World War II in America, 1941, the interest rate is 1.89. Then look at all the spikes. That's the inflation of the 70s. That's that first regime blowing up. And then the other side of it is it deflating. So you have historically low real rates and historically high real rates. Now, we ask ourselves, when is all this going to end? When are we returning to normal? The question we should be asking is, what does normal mean in this environment? So even if you take out the financial crisis, this is the Fed funds rate since 1980. It's kind of one direction. So if we're sitting now at 2% growth, 2% inflation, that's probably where we should be. Now, if you've come out of this relatively unscathed, if your assets are whole, that's not so bad. You can live and survive in that. You can lend and borrow, etc. But what about those folks whose wages have stagnated? This is populism. Very simply, your debts are too high. Your wages are too low to pay off the debt. And crucially, unlike the 1970s, the inflation is too low to eat the debt away. You can't make the creditor take it. The left response is to blame capitalism and blame globalization, and the right response is to blame immigrants and globalization. But other than that, it's essentially very similar, and it's very structural, and it's been baked into the cake through 30 years. Now, is this by malintention? No. Is this by design? No. But what I actually study is complex systems, and this is how complex systems work. They produce outcomes endogenously, deep within the system, that you don't plan for. It's the nature of the system. Just as the first one, nobody planned for an inflationary crisis. In fact, it was the last thing anyone was expecting. We got one. Similarly, with the liberalization and integration of finance, after the fact, we're all wise to leverage. But how many of us were talking about systemic risk in 2006, if we're to be perfectly honest? Now, with that in mind, why is this the new normal? Well, let's think about who the winners and the losers are. The creditors are, in a sense, the winners, but it's a tricky win. The real value of debt goes up, but your ability to collect it goes down. Who is it that gets ultimately killed for this? It's the left parties throughout the OECD, the center-left parties, that have been market supporting over the past 2 decades. So whether that's New Labour, the SPD, the PDS, and the rise of the new left in various guises, that's one result. The other one are the winners, but it's a problematic win because it's a protest win. It's the can't pay, won't pay, will vote, welcome to populism on the right. And the right-wing side of this is very nationalist response, whether it's AFD, Finn's Party, the different people that I've got listed there. But we have a whole panoply. Now, to finish this by thinking about the computer analogy again, what's going on here? When we built the system in 2008, we didn't do a system reset. And you can restart a computer which has now got a misalignment between its software and its hardware, but ultimately it will continue to malfunction. So what tends to happen when we have dodgy hardware is that people called hackers write new code. Populists are hackers. You may not like what they say, but what they're doing is effectively rewriting the code for how the system operates. And those codes don't match together. It's not seamless. It's not flawless. But it's also something that when it's written, it's in the system, and it's very hard to purge. I'll leave it there.